What's up, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more video game music, and we're going back to Chrono Trigger again, and we're going to go back to the Kingdom of Zeal again, which is to say, I did the reaction to Schala's theme, Schala being a character who exists in the 12,000 BC time period in what is called the Kingdom of Zeal. And as I mentioned in that reaction, the Kingdom of Zeal, in the context of the game and the story, it's this very powerful kingdom that has learned to harness this magical power, and so there are magic practitioners, and pretty much everywhere you go within this kingdom. But despite the power of the kingdom, despite their preeminence and technological superiority, it's essentially a doomed civilization because they're getting this power, they're deriving their magical abilities through this parasitic organism, which they don't quite realize the nature of, and they don't realize that it will foretell their doom in the end. And the queen of the kingdom has lost her mind because she's so sort of infatuated with this supernatural power that's being invested in her and her kingdom. And that's leading her to be manipulated and make terrible decisions that are compromising not only her own family members, but other people in the kingdom. And of course, the reality is, you eventually learn there's all sorts of people who live down in these caves and who are not given the power of magic, who are not allowed to share in its benefits, and who are essentially living, not just as second-class citizens, but ultimately as like unpersons, as subhumans. Whereas the kingdom is on these big floating cities, like hoisted by magical power and so on. And so when you go up to this kingdom and you start walking around, you hear the piece that we're going to listen to, which it's the theme for the Zeal Kingdom, but it's given the name Time Circuits. It's very interesting because I think it captures the grandeur of the kingdom. I think it captures the sort of like mystical magic that you, as the player in the narrative, are encountering. Like, wow, these people are doing things that even thousands and thousands of years later, people weren't anywhere near this technology. So you're aware that something has happened. Like, as soon as you get there, it's sort of like, okay, so this isn't in future time periods. So what happens to this kingdom? So again, there's this tension, there's this sort of intense, as I said, grandeur or majesty to the piece, but there's also a flavor of that decadence, of that moral and cultural decay, of that rot, which is ultimately rot of the parasitic organism that has essentially poisoned this kingdom from the inside out, and from the queen on down. And again, the only people who survive after are the people who are already living down on the ground, and a handful of people who survive this, cataclysmic crash and are forced to come to live like normal people. And indeed, there's a nice sort of moment where, these like people who've been living with magical abilities up in these floating cities are now like down on these very, sort of dusty, earth, like patches of earth with caves and so on, and they're like, how are we going to live? And one of the people who's been living there as one of the unpersons is like, well, you're just going to have to learn how to do it, and here, we'll help show you how. So yeah, it's just an amazing game from beginning to end, and the emotional character of the game is really powerful. But like I said, I think this piece very nicely captures the magical quality of this kingdom, but also the sort of under the surface danger and decay that is about to cause it to collapse in on itself. So here we go. This is Yasunori Mitsuda, Yasunori Mitsuda, and his composition Time Circuits, also known as Zeal Kingdom, from Chrono Trigger, 1995. Walking around in a floating city as you're hearing this for the first time, and you're like, okay. But again, already with the knowledge that, multiple thousands of years later, the technology is much more crude and simplistic, and people live in much harsher conditions. So, what happened? vocal synths in the back, they suggest that there might be more to the story. That sting again. And while you're hearing this and walking around, you begin talking to people. You get these very out of touch answers. Like a lot of people in these kingdoms are like, "Oh, I don't know what anything costs. We kind of get everything given to us," and the way they're answering is like, what is happening in this kingdom? And other people give you very like perplexing answers, like that almost they sound like riddles. So again, as you're hearing this music, which is very magical, you are increasingly wondering like what the truth is of what you're seeing and hearing. So again, I think it's a very well placed tune. I think it fits the sort of the atmosphere very well, although again it's sort of like in two different ways it does that. So yeah, once again, shout out to Yasunori Mitsuda, shout out to this game, remains one of my favorite games ever. I have it on a ROM, and I've played it on an emulator on my computer, but I have a Super NES Mini, as well as, actually, now that I remember, I have Chrono Trigger for the PlayStation, which is to say, after Chrono Cross, they eventually released for the original PlayStation a revamped version of Chrono Trigger. It's basically the same game, but with cutscenes drawn, animated by Akira Toriyama, of Dragon Ball Z fame. And so yeah, and in fact, not only does it really kind of add to some of the moments because it gives you a little cinematic, whereas in the game it's just the sort of like the sort of cutscene that's like in game. But at the very end of the game, it gives a cutscene that directly links to the beginning of the story and one of the main features of the story of Chrono Cross, whereas in the original ending, even the very best ending you can get in Chrono Trigger, it doesn't do that. It gives you a very cool ending, don't get me wrong, but it's a little more open-ended, whereas by the time they made this remake, Chrono Cross had already come out, and they knew exactly how to add a little bit to link it together very seamlessly. So yeah, like I said, one of my favorite games ever. I really do enjoy this piece. I think it captures the mode of this time period in the game perfectly. Yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know if you played the game. Let me know if you're a fan of the sequel. Other than that, thank you for listening and watching. I will see you next time. Peace.